Hello Year 10, today's work on development begins with this starter task. So what you need to do is match up the indicators which are in these crazy shapes and there's the definitions and this is what they are. So all you need to do is download a copy of the document, put the number in the table here depending on which one is which. Fairly straightforward. The next task says rethink each definition and write the words high or low next to the development indicator, which would show us whether a country is an MEDC. So you would write high next to GMP, as this would be high for a rich country. I hope that makes sense. Don't worry too much about task 2. Most important is understanding what all of these indicators of development mean. Okay, once you have done that, you need to get yourself into this PowerPoint, okay? It's called Development and Industry. It's on the Teams channel. Okay, so today, we are looking at, this is theme 3, obviously the last theme, economic development, and it's section 3.1. And it says you should be able to use a variety of indicators to assess the level of development in the country, which is really what we're going to focus on today. On Sunday, you should have had a look at inequalities between and within countries on the Seneca stuff with China. Classify production into different sectors. We did in industry. Describe and explain how the proportions of employed in each sector vary according to the level of development. We can have a look at that on Thursday. And describe and explain the process of globalisation and consider its impacts, which we will also have a look at on Thursday. Now, the case study here, bingo, you've already done, which would be the Nike case study. That's why that one was so important, because it covers 2 separate areas of the syllabus. Okay, so what do we mean by development? This definition here is from the UNHCR, and it says that human development basically has 2 strands: directly enhancing human abilities, so creating conditions for long and healthy life, for knowledge and for a decent standard of living, and creating the conditions for human development, so participation in political and community life, environmental sustainability, human security and rights, and gender equality. So these things really link very closely to the Sustainable Development Goals. When we talk about development, what we tend to talk about it is in 2 ways. We talk about economic development, so how rich is a country, how is its wealth generated, and we have historically used phrases like MEDC, more economically developed country, and LEDC, less economically developed country. Increasingly, as we have become more sentient beings, have realised that human development means a lot more than simply how much cash we've got. It's really important to think about things like jobs, education, nutrition, health, leisure, safety, democracy, political and cultural freedom. So we sort of qualify the terms standard of living and development as being kind of 2 different things. So we've got quality of life, standard of living, and development, all meaning similar but slightly different things. So in terms of the factors that affect development within a country, and how quickly a country develops and can develop, it really depends on the kind of the cards that they were dealt, to be honest with you, in terms of physical factors. So the climate of a region obviously affects the ability to do agriculture. So can you feed your population? How much rainfall you get? Do you suffer from droughts? Do you suffer from monsoons, all of those kind of things? Those are the sorts of things that can knock a country back in terms of its development. More tropical climates usually mean that diseases, what we call vector-borne diseases, so things that live in water and insects that move around, there are more of those going about, and those are the countries usually we find around the equator, so places like Malaysia, Indonesia, India, some like the Philippines, the southern part of the Philippines. Those are the kind of countries that really suffer with things like dengue and malaria and things like that. Natural hazards, obviously, we've looked at natural hazards, we've looked at earthquakes and tsunamis and volcanoes. Things like floods and droughts also completely cripple a country in terms of dealing with that. There's a massive kind of cost benefit or opportunity cost, really, I suppose, when you have a country that suffers from all of these hazards. Do you spend money trying to do hazard prevention, or do you spend money on other aspects of development, which is a tricky thing for countries to decide on. Landlocked countries. Landlocked means that you don't have any coastline, so you're a country entirely surrounded by other countries, which means it's really difficult for you to trade and to do shipping and all of that sort of stuff. It means that most developing countries get most of their protein from fish as well. So if your country is landlocked, then that source of food is not so readily available to them, and it means that often people are weak. They're not as active, or their workforce is not as economically productive. Natural resources is a big one. Yes, for sure. Do we have oil? Yes, sir, we do have oil. Minerals, fossil fuels really can massively improve the nation's level of development, as you can see around you right now, if, of course, you are still in the UAE. Also places like Australia as well. Australia has loads of mineral resources in the middle bit of it. They have a lot of tin, they have a lot of copper, they have a lot of precious stones. South Africa as well, loads and loads of resources in that respect, and that is a good way to kick off your development if you've got some of that stuff going on. Human factors. Slightly more complicated. So there's a lot of historical reasons that prevent countries from developing and help them to develop. So past successes and failures. For example, countries that have been colonised, there's quite an exploitative relationship usually between the country that colonises the other one. It usually causes like a massive brain drain, so all the clever people will move to the country, the colonising country. All the raw materials are taken, and kind of after colonisation, there still persists kind of trade agreements and things like that between these countries that are still kind of exploitative in their nature. So that often makes it quite difficult for countries to develop. Political factors. So countries that have got high levels of corruption is obviously going to affect development because resources are not being put into the right places. Military overspending, all of that kind of stuff, and just simply bad leadership can really thwart a country's capacity to develop. Economic and social things, the economic things kind of at the core of development, and all of the rest of the things are kind of stuck around the outside of that. There's a model called the development cable that says that in order for a country to develop, it must have a strong economic core, and then it can kind of stick all the other bits around that. So this is really important, but it's not the only thing that's obviously important. But certainly a country does need to have a viable economy that's diversified enough that they're not just sort of focused on one particular industry, which would make them vulnerable. So having lots of different industries, and having lots of what we call comparative advantage, so things that they can sell to other countries that they really want, things that they're good at making or that they've got natural resources in, and that kind of thing, which gives them an advantage over other countries. Now, Indicators of development usually sort of focus on economic indicators or industry type stuff, health type stuff, or education type stuff. Now at this stage, what I would like you to do is open this Word document, Indicators You Need to Know. On the document, you can see that there are 9 indicators. And the reason the document is called Indicators You Need to Know is because these are all the indicators you need to know. On the sheet, there are 8 indicators that are what is known as single indicators. So I've kind of written it at the end of each one so that you know which one's which. And they just measure one thing. Okay, and that one thing tells us about that particular aspect of development in that country. And some of those single indicators are what we also call proxy indicators. And by that, what we mean is that we can infer quite a lot about a country based on that particular indicator. So, for example, if we look at the first one, which is infant mortality, which is the number of deaths of infants under 1 year old per 1,000 live births. If a country has a really high infant mortality rate, we know immediately that they've obviously got really poor healthcare in their country. Usually we can infer from that they've got quite a high birth rate as well. And all of these things sort of add up together to make us see that usually a country with a high infant mortality rate has a very poor healthcare, is less developed and all that kind of stuff. So that's why we refer to those things as proxy indicators, because they don't actually tell us about loads of things, but you can infer that from the fact that that indicator is like that. So most of these are single indicators, except for this boy here in the bottom corner, the Human Development Index. Now, the Human Development Index, or HDI, is what we call a composite indicator. That is, it is made up of more than one aspect of development. Okay, so HDI is made up of 3 things, and you absolutely must know this one. Okay, so it is composed of, hence why it's called a composite indicator, life expectancy at birth, which is the health dimension. Education dimension is measured by the mean years of schooling for adults, so the average amount of time an adult spends in school. And standards of living is measured by gross national income per capita. Now, gross national income per capita is also up here as well, which is a single indicator. All right, so you must know the HDI. Now, what I'm going to suggest to you is that you learn these 9 indicators, and on Thursday's lesson, we'll do a little quiz to see how well you've learnt those 9. Okay, so have a read through this document, make some notes, copy the text, do what you need to do to make sure you've got what you need in your notes, and then I will set up another recording for the rest of the PowerPoint because I can only do 15 minutes. All right.